Ontar's log, 16th of Gaynado, or it will be soon anyway, 2,000 years after sunfall. What a day this one has been, and it is still not over yet. Rogar and Micah almost killed another group of religious followers with bad food. Balazar and I tortured and interrogated a wretch for information about my missing family. Cameron left the party being replaced by an elf-loving Eltanis from Aspera, and Tebby verbally duked it out with the Emperor of Rakanoth himself. All of this, and it's only midday. I didn't even mention we're close to finally embarking from this forsaken city. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's recap the last session. The day began with Rogar, our party's resident cleric, waking up early in the morning inside his magical tiny hut within the Temple of Mersaria. After a few failed attempts to wake Micah the wizard, who also slept in the hut that night, Rogar slapped him across the face, jolting him back to reality. As the two left the hut, they noticed several other followers of Mersaria sleeping against and on top of the hut. The two attempted to wake them, to no avail. As you well know, Rogar only chooses to assault his enemies, his friends, and child followers of Jotrin, so off the two went, leaving the sleepers to a rude awakening when the tiny hut would inevitably disappear. Before leaving, the religious pair went to the kitchen to grab a bite to eat for breakfast. For the second time on this escapade to the capital of the Empire, Rogar was roped into a religious duty before he was allowed to leave the temple. This time, though, rather than preaching, the task was cooking. At least Micah was enthusiastic about it. The two went to work with an unknown spongy substance making up the centerpiece of their prepared meal. After several poor decisions in the kitchen that would sound like they were from some bard song if I were to describe them in detail, all of the ingredients at the duo's disposal were rendered inedible and borderline poisonous. They quickly made their escape following this realization, hearing screaming from both the kitchen and where the tiny hut used to be on the way out. They quickly met up with Cambrum, our warforged paladin compatriot. They asked the large mechanical man whether he could purify poisonous food if, theoretically, there were a large group of people about to need some healing after their morning meal. It was in this moment that Rogar learned from Micah how to lie. Cambrum was oblivious, though, responding that of course he could, and both of them, particularly Micah, should have known about that common spell. The topic quickly shifted, and the rest of the morning was spent with Cambrum and Micah studying Elvish and Rogar tagging along. I, around this time, was on the other side of town, preparing for the interrogation of a wyvern knight with Balazar, as we had planned the previous evening. All morning I spent getting my equipment ready and scouring the dwarven city underneath the capital for a proper place to have the questioning. After talking with a two-headed warforged with a limp and a one-armed dwarven with a drink, I found the spot secluded enough that we wouldn't be bothered by guards, knights, spies, or anyone for that matter. Meanwhile, Balazar, the leader of our group, had woken up from quite a bad dream where an evil vampire lord declared that the Dragonborn was no longer useful, even after a display of good wit by the barbarian. Sometimes plot is unavoidable, unfortunately. To Balazar, at least, it was better than the woman who had called him a pervert the previous night. Long story, not worth getting into. Where was I? Oh yes, Balazar waking up. Something about a fruit stand, getting a drugged banana, and being nice to a human. Now onto the good stuff. Tebby, the Minotaur, our newest member of the party at the time, also woke up with the intention of having a very productive morning like the rest of us. There was much to do, saving her best friend, getting married to her lover back in Pisios, and writing a new book. She started her day strong with contacting the Lady Gricoria, a member of the Rakanoth High Council, and setting a meeting. Sadly for her, immediately following this there was an unseen force that took the Minotaur over, stopping any further action from occurring before the Emperor's awaited arrival. Before we can get to that, though, we must briefly discuss the interrogation I mentioned earlier. Balazar, in an expert move, successfully convinced one of those horrible wyvern knights to come help him catch and interrogate a fugitive, me, down in the dwarven tunnels. He even got him to eat the drugged banana on the way down. Everything was going perfectly. We're in the room with the knight who's passed out from the drug, and there's not a soul within miles. Balazar had even come better prepared than I had, rendering my materials unnecessary. Unfortunately, the knight actually knew exactly what was going on and tried to escape. A fight ensued to get the mandibles on his wrists, and it was enormously messy. But don't worry, it gets even worse. I turn around to get a rope to tie him up, and Balazar starts morbidly torturing the already disheveled rider. Fine, I wasn't going to do that unless the knight wouldn't talk, but, whatever. Well, I come back and start asking questions, and the knight wouldn't talk. Who'd have guessed? Maybe there's a reason the Order never assigned me to interrogations. Anyways, I think to myself that he's crazy, but Balazar was right to start early. Frustrated, I strike the knight with the butt of my sword, and the guy goes and passes out. I was infuriated. I was taking a huge risk by even being in this horrible city. I can't even calculate what the risk was for this, and now I got nothing. Broken and not knowing what to do, we ended up leaving to be present at the Emperor's arrival. I wasn't planning on being there. In fact, Micah and I had made up this whole thing so I wouldn't have to, but nothing was going according to plan at this point, and I was feeling completely defeated. Balazar, though, was reassuring as we headed up to the palace. "You will be the safest person in the room," he said, and I believed him. His respect for me, despite my foolish show of incompetence during the interrogation, helped lift me up just a little. Though we walked for hours looking for a medic for the injured knight, Balazar and I didn't talk much after that. Still, though, the whole situation from the evening prior all the way till then had me respecting and trusting the Dragonborn far more than I ever had. When Balazar and I arrived at the palace, the others of the party were already there, as were people and races from across the continent. Cambram was with General Clank and some of the general's friends from a neighboring state, while Micah, Rogar, and Tebby were with Lady Grucoria and her company. The court was then brought to session, and the Emperor entered. After opening remarks, Balazar spoke to the court about the party's exploits over the last few months, and Cambram came over to offer supporting details and clarifications when necessary. Eventually, all present agreed that the vampire army was a massive threat. There was a particularly outspoken dwarf during that rabble. He is very important, but I don't exactly know why. Balazar then went into the need to save his friend Amphi from the clutches of Genie Shahida from Al-Janul. The Emperor recognized how important this was to Balazar, his best friend, and agreed to support the mission. However, he made the decision to assign Cambram to another duty, to our party's dismay. There were tears from Micah, shock from Rogar, and many vocal protests from Tebby straight to the Emperor's face, but he was not swayed. To replace the Metal Man, he called upon an ambassador from Aspera, Eltanis. I perked up when I heard his home country was the same as mine. It was a similar feeling to when I found out another human had joined the party. Come to think of it, I really hope he's actually from Aspera. I should check on that. Anyways, as Balazar does, he immediately challenged the small half-elf to an arm wrestling competition, to which Eltanis lost spectacularly. Unfazed, though, the ambassador proceeded to give each member of the party a gift to prove his worth. Not all of his gifts were received with joy, but some, including myself, were quite pleased with Eltanis' offering of friendship. To me, at least, he appeared amicable and friendly, eager to win the party's trust. After the closing of the court, the party each took their time saying goodbye to Cambram. Though I have noted hints of emotion in this log in the past, it was clearly the most I had ever seen from the mechanical being. Still small, but when compared to the unfeeling nature of other Warforged, there is truly something of a heart inside this one. From here we pick up, still on the 15th, with Balazar heading off to get beat up. At least that's what he keeps telling us. Here's to no one getting too hurt, unless they're a human incarnation of Tiamat, of course. This concludes Ontar's log, March 13th, 2021.